The most dangerous leaders in history were not those who understood power and used it badly. They were those who never understood it at all and stumbled through its consequences, believing they were operating by principles that the world around them had long since abandoned. There is a truth about leadership that every generation must discover for itself, not because it is hidden, not because the evidence for it is scarce, but because it contradicts something that most people believe about human beings that they are extraordinarily reluctant to relinquish. The truth is this: human nature does not improve. Most people believe that the present era, with its accumulated knowledge, its developed institutions, and its stated commitment to values that previous eras lacked the sophistication to fully articulate, represents a genuine advancement in the fundamental character of human behavior, that people today are meaningfully different from the people who populated earlier periods of history in ways that make the lessons of those periods less applicable to the challenges of this one. Those who understand human nature know that this belief, however comforting it feels, is among the most strategically dangerous available to anyone who intends to exercise leadership in any domain of significant consequence. Human beings want what they have always wanted: security, recognition, advantage, and the specific quality of significance that comes from being seen as important by the people whose regard they value. They fear what they have always feared: loss, irrelevance, the specific vulnerability of a position that others can threaten. They are capable of the loyalty that favorable circumstances and wise leadership consistently produce, and they are equally capable of the betrayal that threatened interests, diminished regard, and inadequate management consistently produce. What most people don't realize is that these constants are not simply observations about human weakness. They are the most practically applicable knowledge available to anyone attempting to lead, influence, or navigate any environment populated by other human beings, because they allow the strategically informed person to anticipate behavior that appears surprising to those operating without this understanding, and to structure their decisions and their relationships in ways that account for human nature as it actually is, rather than as it is ideally presented. Pay attention to what this means for the practice of leadership specifically, because it means something that every genuine leader eventually discovers, and that no amount of idealism about human potential can prevent from becoming necessary to understand. Leadership that is designed for human beings as they ideally should be will consistently fail to account for the behaviors that human beings, as they actually are, will inevitably produce. And the leader who is consistently surprised by the ambition, the self-interest, or the strategic behavior of the people they are leading is a leader whose model of human nature was never accurate enough to produce effective decisions about the human beings it was supposed to govern. This is where the relationship between power and morality reveals the harsh truth that most future leaders resist accepting the longest, and that the most costly strategic errors in any leadership career are almost always made by those who have not yet genuinely integrated it. Most people believe that the standards of good behavior that govern private life should govern public leadership as well, that honesty, consistency, the keeping of promises, and the treatment of others as one would wish to be treated are not simply moral preferences, but effective strategic principles that produce better outcomes even in the competitive, high-stakes environments where leadership operates. The wisest leaders recognize that this belief is not entirely wrong, but it is incomplete in a way that consistently produces one of the most characteristic and most costly errors of idealistic leadership: the error of applying the standards of private moral life to strategic decisions, whose consequences will be determined not by the moral quality of the decision, but by the strategic landscape in which it is made. In private life, honesty produces trust. In strategic environments, indiscriminate honesty produces exposure. In private life, the consistent keeping of promises demonstrates integrity. In strategic environments, the unconditional keeping of every commitment regardless of changed circumstances, demonstrates the inflexibility of someone who cannot adapt to conditions that the original commitment did not anticipate. This is not an argument for dishonesty or broken promises. It is an argument for the specific distinction that every effective leader must eventually draw between the moral standards that govern what kind of person they are in their fundamental character and the strategic intelligence that governs what kind of decisions they make in specific circumstances, that the simple application of private moral standards was never designed to navigate. This connects directly to the appearance of virtue as a strategic instrument, and it is perhaps the principle that most clearly reveals the specific sophistication of genuine leadership that naive approaches to power consistently miss. Most people believe that virtue and its appearance are the same thing, that the genuinely virtuous person will naturally appear virtuous, and that the appearance of virtue in the absence of genuine virtue is simply deception that will eventually be exposed. Those who understand human nature know that this belief, however admirable its commitment to authenticity, consistently underestimates two things simultaneously: the degree to which genuine virtue, poorly communicated, fails to produce the trust and legitimacy that leadership requires, and the degree to which the skillful management of virtue's appearance is itself a form of strategic competence, rather than simply a form of hypocrisy. The leader who possesses genuine virtue, but communicates it in ways that their audience cannot receive, who is honest in ways that read as tactless, who is principled in ways that appear inflexible, who is genuinely committed to just governance in ways that are not visible to the people whose cooperation that governance requires, is providing their constituents with virtue they cannot use. Most people miss this warning sign because the management of appearance feels, to those with genuine virtue, like a compromise of that virtue, rather than an expression of it. The hidden reason it is more accurately understood as an expression of genuine leadership is that leadership is fundamentally a relational activity, one whose effectiveness depends on the quality of the connection between what the leader is and what the people being led are able to perceive and respond to. The leader who closes the gap between genuine virtue and its effective communication has not compromised their integrity. They have completed the leadership function that genuine virtue alone, poorly communicated, was unable to perform. There is a force that every leader eventually encounters, one that arrives not through any specific opponent's strategy, not through any particular failure of preparation, but through the simple and irreducible fact that the world does not remain cooperative with even the most carefully constructed plans for an indefinite period. It is fortune, the specific configuration of circumstances beyond any leader's control, that shapes outcomes in ways that no preparation alone can fully determine. Most people believe that the relationship between preparation and outcome is more direct than it actually is, that the leader who prepares sufficiently will succeed, and the leader who fails to prepare will not, and that the primary variable determining any leadership outcome is the quality of what the leader brought to the challenge they faced. Those who understand human nature know that this belief, while capturing something genuinely important about the relationship between preparation and outcome, consistently underestimates the degree to which circumstances will present every leader with situations that their preparation, however thorough, did not fully anticipate. The harsh truth is not that preparation is insufficient. It is that preparation for specific anticipated challenges, however excellent, is always incomplete in ways that fortune will eventually expose. And the leader who understands this truth builds not simply toward specific anticipated challenges, but toward the general capability of response, of adaptation, of maintaining internal stability, while the external environment presents conditions that the original strategy did not account for, that allows them to extract better outcomes from adverse circumstances than leaders of equivalent capability who built only for the scenarios they expected. Pay attention to what this means for the specific question of how leaders are built, because it means something that most approaches to leadership development consistently miss. The most consequential leadership capabilities are not those that produce excellent outcomes in favorable circumstances. They are those that prevent catastrophic outcomes in unfavorable ones. And the development of these capabilities requires the specific discipline of preparing for conditions that one hopes will never arrive, of building the internal resources, the external alliances, and the strategic flexibility that adverse circumstances will require during the periods when those circumstances have not yet materialized, and when the investment in their preparation appears excessive relative to the current environment's demands. This connects directly to the strategic management of enemies, which reveals a dimension of leadership intelligence that most people's understanding of leadership entirely omits. Most people believe that good leadership naturally minimizes enemies, that the leader who governs justly, who treats people fairly, and who pursues genuinely good objectives will encounter less opposition than the leader who does not. Those who understand human nature know that this belief, however comforting consistently, produces leaders who are unprepared for the opposition that effective leadership invariably generates. Effective leadership creates enemies, not because of moral failure, not because of unjust governance, but because any significant decision by any significant leader will advantage some parties and disadvantage others, and the disadvantaged parties will reliably experience the disadvantage as a reason for opposition regardless of the decision's genuine merit. The wisest leaders recognize that enemy management is therefore not a remedial activity, not something undertaken only when opposition has already materialized, but a continuous and proactive dimension of strategic leadership that shapes decisions before they are made and relationships before they become adversarial. This means understanding which parties a contemplated decision will disadvantage before the decision is implemented, and considering what measures can reduce the intensity of their opposition, convert potential enemies into neutrals, or ensure that the opposition they generate cannot reach a threshold that threatens the strategy's continuation. Most people miss this warning sign because enemy management requires accepting something about leadership that idealistic accounts consistently obscure, that the calculation of political consequences is a legitimate and necessary component of every significant leadership decision, and that the leader who makes decisions without this calculation is not being more principled than the leader who includes it. They are simply being less complete. This is where the danger of advisors reveals its most consequential practical dimension, because the information environment from which every leader makes decisions is always, to some degree, shaped by the interests of the people providing that information. Most people believe that the solution to this problem is to surround oneself with people of genuine integrity, with advisors whose character is sufficiently reliable that their counsel can be trusted to prioritize the leader's interests over their own. Those who understand human nature know that this solution, while valuable as far as it goes, consistently overestimates the degree to which even the most genuinely well-intentioned advisor is capable of providing counsel that is fully separable from the specific perspective, the specific fears, and the specific interests that their position creates. The leader who depends entirely on advisors for the formation of strategic judgment has outsourced the most consequential activity of their leadership to people whose judgment is inevitably shaped by considerations that differ from their own, and the leader who cannot independently assess the quality of the advice they are receiving, who cannot distinguish between counsel that serves their genuine interests and counsel that serves the counselor's interests while appearing to serve the leaders, is making decisions from a permanently compromised information environment. Pay attention to what this implies for the development of genuine leadership intelligence, because it implies something that most accounts of leadership development consistently underemphasize. The most important intellectual development for any future leader is not the accumulation of knowledge about specific domains. It is the development of the independent judgment that allows them to evaluate information from any domain, to assess the quality and the interests behind the counsel they receive, to identify where those interests diverge from their own, and to make decisions that reflect their own genuine assessment of the situation, rather than the assessments of people whose incentives were always partly shaped by considerations other than the leader's welfare. This is where the timing of decisive action reveals its function as the specific skill that most clearly separates consequential leadership from competent management. Most competent managers can identify what action is required in any given situation. The specific skill that the most consequential leaders possess is the ability to identify when that action will be most effective, which requires the specific combination of observational patience, strategic intelligence, and emotional discipline that allows a leader to sustain an ambiguous position through the period of maximum uncertainty without committing to a resolution that the available information does not yet support. The leader who acts too early reveals their hand before the position is established, commits resources before the moment is optimal, and eliminates the optionality that patience would have preserved. The leader who acts too late loses the specific window that circumstances briefly opened, a window that in many consequential situations does not reopen at the same configuration of opportunity that the missed moment contained. Most people miss this warning sign because the pressure to act is almost always most intense at the moment when action is most premature, when the uncertainty of the situation creates the specific discomfort that action, however ill-timed, would immediately relieve, and the specific discipline required to maintain composure and strategic patience in the face of this pressure is among the rarest and most consequential leadership capabilities available. This is where the foundation of genuine authority reveals why leaders who build through force, rather than through legitimacy, consistently find themselves in the specific strategic position that force-dependent authority eventually and inevitably produces. Most people believe that the most direct path to authority is the accumulation of power sufficient to enforce compliance, that the leader who controls enough resources and can apply enough pressure will achieve the sustained cooperation that authority requires. Those who understand human nature know that this belief, while describing something real about the short-term relationship between force and compliance, consistently misunderstands the long-term relationship between force-based authority and the genuine cooperation that makes organizations and communities capable of sustained achievement. Force produces compliance. It does not produce the specific quality of engaged, discretionary effort that genuine authority generates. The effort that people produce not because they must, but because they believe in the legitimacy of what they are contributing to and in the competence of the person directing their contribution. And the leader who has built their authority primarily through the accumulation of force will find, at the specific moment when force cannot be applied, that the compliance it produced disappears with the same rapidity with which any other coerced behavior disappears when the coercion is removed. This connects to the long-term cost of short-term cruelty, which is perhaps the principle that most directly reveals the specific temporal blindness that characterizes the most consequential leadership errors across every domain of historical example. Most people understand that cruelty, deception, and exploitation are morally problematic. Few people fully understand that they are also, across sufficient time, strategically counterproductive, not because of any abstract principle of justice that eventually reasserts itself, but because of the specific and predictable ways that the political, relational, and reputational costs of these instruments accumulate in the environments where leadership must continue to operate long after the specific situations that made them appear advantageous have passed. The leader who employs cruelty to solve an immediate problem has solved it at the cost of creating a specific kind of future opposition, more determined, more willing to accept personal cost in pursuit of the leader's removal, and more capable of recruiting others to the same objective than the problem that the cruelty resolved. History has shown that the timing of this cost's arrival is remarkably consistent. It arrives at the moment of the leader's maximum vulnerability, when the accumulation of other challenges has reduced the resources available to absorb the political opposition that the history of cruelty created. True influence begins not with the acquisition of authority, but with the development of the understanding that allows authority once acquired to be exercised effectively in the service of objectives worth pursuing through methods calibrated to the actual nature of the human beings whose cooperation those objectives require, across a time horizon long enough to account for the consequences that short-term decisions consistently create in futures that short-term thinking never adequately imagined. Power rarely announces itself, and genuine leadership, the kind that builds something durable, that earns something genuine, and that accomplishes something worth the cost of its achievement, announces itself least of all. It is simply present in the quality of the decisions it makes, in the sustainability of the authority it builds, and in the specific evidence accumulating across sufficient time that the person exercising it understood something about human nature, about power, and about the actual requirements of leadership that most people never stop to learn.